Welcome to today's lecture on marsupial locomotion. The objective of this lecture is to learn that the marsupials of Australia have very diverse locomotor modes, including both terrestrial, quadrupedal locomotion and hopping, as well as different forms of arboreal locomotion. From information provided in this lecture, as well as from your own reading, you should acquire knowledge of the evolutionary pressures that have led to the diversification of locomotor modes in marsupials. You should be able to summarise the types of anatomical modifications that have occurred among species that adopt the different locomotor modes, and you should understand the costs and benefits of these different locomotor modes. So why is locomotion important? By definition, locomotion is any of a variety of methods that animals will use to move from one place to another. There are animals that depend on their environment for transportation, so this is referred to as passive locomotion. However, most animals will use self-propelled locomotion, which includes things such as running, swimming, hopping and gliding. Animals will move for a variety of reasons, most likely to do with finding food, a mate, suitable habitat, or to escape predators. So locomotion obviously has a lot to do with survival and reproduction. So the ability to move is essential for survival, and as a result, natural selection will shape locomotion methods and mechanisms. The locomotor performance of an individual limits its behaviour, however, and therefore limits the fitness of an individual within its niche. So studying locomotion gives us an understanding of both the challenges an animal may encounter in their environment and the morphology that aids them in overcoming these challenges. Just a couple of definitions that we will come across in the lecture. So gait refers to the pattern of movement of the limbs of animals during locomotion over a solid substrate. Some gaits are actually given specific names. However, the complexity of biological systems and interactions with the environment can make these distinctions somewhat unclear. So today we will refer to gaits in some way, but at times the distinction between gaits isn't always very clear. Species may use different gaits due to differences in anatomy, and this again is due to evolved innate preferences as a result of habitat differences. So we see differences in foot postures. We see a plantigrade foot posture, which is the flat-footed stance, which is depicted here. And we also see a digitigrade foot posture, which is essentially tiptoed. So you can see here with colour coding the variation in the structure of the foot bones in relation to those postures. And then we do have a third type of foot posture, which is the ungular grade for hooved animals. So hoppers. Hopping is the quintessential kangaroo trait seen in all existing macropodids, with the exception of the musky rat kangaroo, which is actually a quadrupedal bounder, which involves the synchronous use of the hind and forelimbs. Hopping is actually quite unique among relatively large mammals. So by large mammals, we mean those over 5 kilos in body mass. The popular notion of a hopping kangaroo, when we think about it, is typically a fairly large animal such as the grey or red kangaroo. However, it's recognised that members of the family Macropodid, so all of the kangaroos in the broader sense, are diverse in size and habit. The largest kangaroos that live today are females can reach or do reach the size of approximately 25 kilos, while males on average are about twice that size. However, they can reach up to 90 kilos, so quite large animals. But the Pleistocene kangaroos actually weighed up to 240 kilos. So this kind of size calls into question the biomechanic abilities of hopping in those ancient kangaroos. Sphenurines are the kangaroos that are usually referred to as being those giant kangaroos. So they're distinguished by their size, relatively short faces. They have the loss of a fifth digit in the foot, and they were shown to have specialised arms and hands, which has been interpreted to be related to an adaptation for browsing. The different locomotor abilities, they believe to have different locomotor abilities relative to macropodids that we see today, and it's been proposed that they employed a bipedal striding type of gait, so no hopping. No hopping in those very large species, so that kind of bipedal striding would have been the sole mode of locomotion. The smaller of the giant kangaroos may have also hopped to achieve faster speeds. So we have a giant kangaroo local to Western Australia, and this short-faced giant kangaroo species that is indicated here was first discovered at Mammoth Cave down south. So it was a leaf-eating kangaroo with a large skull and very long, powerful arms for that browsing behaviour. But yes, because of that huge size, this is sort of a diagrammatic representation of how they would have moved through the forest habitat. So all living kangaroos have a digitigrade hind foot posture while locomoting, but they will rest with their hind feet in a plantigrade stance. Hopping is seen in all existing macropodids, with the exception of the musky rat kangaroo, which, as we said, is a quadrupedal bounder. And this group is actually considered to be a sister taxon. So if you look down here, this is where the musky rat kangaroo sits. So there's only one species in this family. And then the macropodids are up here, which include the macropods and the podaroos, as well as the banded hair wallaby that is found only on West Australian islands. So within the podaroos, they habitually bound and only hop at high speed when alarmed. But bettongs will habitually hop like the macropodids. So the macropodids, all species of this subfamily, use a form of slow pentapedal progression while foraging on the ground, and this is referred to as a pentapedal walk. For this, the forefeet are placed together on the ground, the hind feet are lifted, and the tail is essentially used as a fifth leg to propel the animal through the space between the forefeet. So this kind of locomotion is actually used more frequently than hopping. I've just got a video here to show you this type of locomotion. So the video gives you some descriptions. Front legs make contact, tail makes contact, and then the hind legs come through. See at half speed. So they're consistently pushing with their tail as they're browsing on the ground for food. Or grazing on the ground for food, I should have said. So this is in contrast to bipedal hopping, which by definition is a specialised mode of terrestrial locomotion characterised by sustained sustained motion in which the hind limbs contact the ground simultaneously with no movement of no involvement of the forelimbs. So hopping kangaroos actually push off with both their large feet at the same time, and they're using their tails for balance. So there's been some anatomical modifications to allow for this type of locomotion. Like the musky rat kangaroo, primitive macropodids are presumed to have been quadrupedal bounders occupying rainforest habitats. The macropodid modifications, some macropodid modifications were likely present in these ancestors, those being a short femur but a long fibula and tibia with elongated feet, and then tarsal modifications or ankle bone modifications to stabilise the ankle joint and limit motion to flexion and extension only. It's believed that then further tarsal specialisations are evident in further tarsal specialisations are more derived in all other living macropodids than what we see in the musky rat kangaroo. So these include further strengthening the lower limb joints to reduce the mobility so that the motion is allowable only in a forwards and backwards direction, which when you think about hopping, that makes sense, that the lower limb joints are protected from any sort of sidewards movement. So there's molecular data that suggests that the evolution of these bipedal hopping ankle features occurred over 15 million years ago, as did the extension of the hind limbs. Interestingly, there's no evidence that there is any difference in the properties of the ankle extensor muscles and their tendons that power hopping in kangaroos compared to similar sized placental mammals that don't hop. Although it has been shown that enzyme levels in these muscles in the kangaroos may indicate higher levels of aerobic work. So, as you probably know, mitochondria are vital organelles that provide energy for muscle function. And it's been found that 86% of the total body mitochondrial volume in the red kangaroo is actually in the upper hind limb musculature. So that gives you some indication about how they achieve the power for hopping. Bone stresses on the tibia appear to be greater in large kangaroos, but not so much in smaller kangaroos, relative to similar size placentals. There is evidence that tibial bone cortical thickness increases with increasing body size in kangaroos. So it seems that bone thickness is a way of offsetting that stress on those bones that are supporting the animal while they bound or hop. So the adaptive drivers of the evolution of the hopping gait are not entirely clear. Hopping has evolved 5 times in rodents, but most species are small, the largest being the spring hare. So the spring hare has body mass of about 4 kilos, which is the size of a small wallaby. Bipedal hopping was probably adaptive for the ancient kangaroos as they moved through the rainforest to a more open habitat with the drying up of the continent. Support for this comes from the fact that the musky rat kangaroo represents an earlier stage in kangaroo evolution without some anatomical specialisations and retains these primitive features that are suited more to a rainforest habitat. So expansion of grasslands and deserts drove the evolution of the hop, as it's an efficient way to cover long distances from food source to food source that may be spread across those large areas. So here we have a phylogenetic timescale of the macropodids, depicting the convergent appearance of both arboreal and scansorial locomotion. So this is in green down here, which occurred in the barbarids and the crown macropodids. So the background colour gradient basically infers the hypothesised locomotory transition from predominantly terrestrial quadrupedal progression. So this is in tan, as characterised by the extant group of the musky rat kangaroo, silhouetted up here, to increasingly bipedal gaits in the crown podoros and macropods. So this is indicated down here. And then this is correlated against a schematic of changing paleo habitats through time down the bottom. So the energy efficiency of hopping in the large kangaroos and wallabies that are greater than 3 kilos, hopping is associated with exceptional locomotor energy efficiency. Unlike placental mammals, where energy costs increase linearly with speed, in large kangaroos, energy costs and speed are actually decoupled. Therefore, daily expenditure of locomotor foraging is much less for large kangaroo than those similar-sized cursorial placentals. So by cursorial, we mean those that are adapted for running. So what are these mechanisms behind the economy of hopping? First up, it's to do with this elastic conservation of energy. So during hopping, energy is stored in the first part of the stride and then recovered in the subsequent phase. So there's a high level of elastic conservation of energy, which is a distinct feature of hopping. And it's believed that savings from elastic energy stored during hopping have estimated to be at around 40% in a medium-sized wallaby. The second mechanisms that facilitates the economy of hopping is the extension of stride length. So an advantage of hopping is that speed can be attained by increasing stride length without also having to increase stride frequency. So overall, this reduces the energetic cost of limb recycling. So moving away now from hopping and talking about arboreal locomotion in marsupials. So arboreal habitats represent quite a challenging environment to any animal. They're typically characterised by discontinuous substrates at a significant height. So for successful navigation, animals need to develop strategies for overcoming these challenges, and these can include things like climbing vertical substrates or traversing circular supports that might have varying inclinations and varying thicknesses. There's also obviously up there a lot of inconsistency in surfaces, including diverging branches, knots, bends in trees and branches, as well as different textures of those branches and structures. And so animals need to develop an effective way to cross gaps between branches and trees. So locomotor performance is widely documented in arboreal mammals and recognised to occur in many groups: primates, rodents, carnivores and marsupials. Primates are considered the most derived group, allowing to their affiliation with and their fitness within arboreal niches. Primates incorporate a diagonally coupled walk. So that is when they have one forelimb forward and the opposite hind limb forward on the other side of the body. And primates will adjust the timing of footfalls that increase or decreases the moment of diagonal bipedal support. So the locomotion of some arboreal marsupials also reflects strategies of primates like this during arboreal locomotion. But the fact that the marsupial lineage diverged from placental mammals long before primates were present suggests that, or indicates that these similarities have obviously developed via convergent evolution. We recognise that arboreal marsupials belong to 7 distinct families. So there's more than 20 species of marsupials that are actually arboreal. And the exploitation of an arboreal environment provides access to diverse resources and minimises risk from terrestrial predators. So in an arboreal context, gait patterns may serve as a behavioural mechanism to enhance stability and safety. Diagonal sequence gaits, which we mentioned before, which is the opposite, having the opposite forelimb and hind limb forward, as seen in primates. So this can contribute. This sequence gait contributes to dynamic stability in arboreal substrate navigation, as it reduces the periods of the stride where the limbs are arranged as a unilateral bipod. In contrast, lateral sequence gaits may be functionally linked to static stability in substrate navigation, and it maximises a proportion of the stride where the limbs are positioned as a wide polygon of support. So lateral sequence gaits is what we see in many ungulates. We recognise that marsupial climbers use combinations of sequence gaits, of different sequence gaits, depending on the substrate. So to talk now about koalas specifically, we recognise that they are arboreal specialists that feed on the leaves of eucalypts and have a really low energy eucalypt diet, and are therefore mostly inactive. So they possess an opposable hallux on the feet, which is a feature present in both marsupial and primate arboreal specialists. So again, a example of convergent evolution. And they possess 2 opposable hand digits. So this is referred to as zygodactyly. That creates a strong grip. So that is evident here. And a study from a group in Queensland has showed that during ground locomotion, koalas tend to use marsupial-like strategies for locomotion. So marsupial-like strategies is referring to lateral sequence gait. So koalas are using lateral sequence gait when they're on the ground, but when they're moving up amongst the branches, they maximise stability by switching over to a primate-like or diagonal sequence-like gait. Sugar gliders and squirrel gliders, also arboreal. So these are small, omnivorous, nocturnal gliding possums, and they have specific adaptations for gliding, but also they're required to climb. And a separate study has found that they also use a combination of diagonal and lateral sequence gait, depending on the substrate. As well as variation in gait sequences, arboreal stability is also influenced by speed, which is a function of stride frequency and stride length. So increased speed during locomotion can be achieved either by increasing stride frequency and decreasing stride length, or the opposite of that, reducing stride frequency and increasing stride length. The strategy of increasing speed through increased stride length is most often encountered in your medium and large size species, as it enhances safety during, it also enhances safety obviously during arboreal locomotion. In contrast, increasing speed by stride frequency seems better suited for those smaller arboreal marsupials, which may be subject to which aren't going to be subject to branch sway as they move. And it decreases body oscillations as the limb touches down on the branch. Prehensile tails are evident in many of the arboreal marsupials, especially the possums. So these are defined as having the ability to grasp objects and are commonly used as a fifth appendage during locomotion. Tail prehensility has evolved independently 14 times in 40 different mammalian genera. So as I mentioned, many Australian possums, as well as all the gliding species, have tails that are prehensile to some extent. So a fully prehensile tail is capable of suspending the body from a substrate, whereas a semi-prehensile tail lacks the ability to support whole body suspension. So it's used for locomotor manoeuvres such as bridging and leaping, and for postural behaviours such as hanging while feeding. It can also be used for stability and support, as the tail can quickly grasp onto a branch and prevent falling from the tree. So gliding, this is the simplest form of flight. Other forms of flight are powered or parachuting. So parachuting is a bit different to gliding. We recognise that flying frogs parachute with their webbed toes. Gliding is when wings or a membrane actually provides some lift and the forward motion comes from falling through the air with an associated loss of altitude. And while parachuting animals can only travel at one speed, gliders can actually travel at a range of speed and manipulate their speed. So speed can be reduced by increasing the area of the wing or the patagium, which is a membrane of skin used for gliding. Gliding has arisen in many vertebrate groups, including the marsupials. So gliders have distinctive external characteristics that are adaptations for gliding. As we mentioned, there is the patagium. So this is a thin furred membrane that stretches from the forelimbs to the hind limbs, and it increases surface area in flight. When it's not in use, it's retracted and can be visible as a wavy line alongside the body. So gliders tend to have lengthened limb bones to increase gliding surface area. This is in some species, not all. They might have elongated vertebrae, which results in a longer and stiffer tail that functions as a stabiliser to limit sideways movement when gliding. They tend to have larger gaps between the eyes, which is believed to be due to or to facilitate better assessment of distances and obstacle avoidance during flight. Some species will also have specialised fur, which enhances lift in flight. And then we see more distinctive specialisations, such as in the yellow-bellied glider and its pouch, which has a septum. So the septum divides the pouch into two compartments to limit landing impact on the joeys. And then feather-tail gliders have these foot pads, which are ridges of skin perforated with sweat glands. And the moisture from those sweat glands creates surface tension. So essentially these foot pads act as little suction caps for landing. So I've just got some diagrammatic representations of some of those anatomical modifications. Here we have evidence of greater limb length in the greater glider. This is a scanning electron microscopy of those foot pads in the feather-tail glider. And then here is an image of that division in the pouch of the yellow-bellied glider. So we're now just going to watch some glides. So this is the sugar glider that have a body size of about 16 to 21 centimetres in length. The sugar glider is actually the most common and widespread species of glider. It's found to inhabit a variety of habitats in Australia and New Guinea, including like tall wet forests as well as open woodlands. An interesting fact is that it tends to make a yapping sound like a small dog, and they're very cute. So unfortunately, they've become very popular in the illegal pet trade as they come to land. So what's involved in a glide? Gliders will first off often spend time preparing for a flight and may assess the intended route. And this may especially be the case when it's windy. However, they're also seen to run along a branch and launch without pause or hesitation. So it may depend on their strategy for assessing a glide, may depend on how familiar they are with their environment. Once launched, the glider will spread its front legs forward and outward, and then the hind legs will stretch backwards. The patagium is extended soon after launching to guide that glide. Glides can cover up to 100 metres, but most flights are 20 to 30 metres, with variation in distances, obviously depending on the species, but also the purpose of the glide. So you tend to see longer glides when there's locomotion going on in relation to foraging. An upward swoop at the end of the flight helps to slow the animal before landing. And apparently gliding marsupials are far from silent as they move around. So large individuals are often heard crash landing on trees. And with that footage that we were just seeing of a sugar glider, I think we can appreciate how that happens. So what is the adaptive significance of gliding? So marked changes in the Australian climate at the end of the Oligocene continued through the Miocene. So this is about 30 million years ago. And then as the continent drifted north, there was a rainfall reduction and seasonality increased. So correspondingly, the lush vegetation receded and tree cover thinned. What happened then is that arboreal mammals were then required to leap further because of these increased distances between trees. And so it was from that it's believed that then some marsupials evolved the ability to glide so that those leaps were more controlled and could extend further. Gliding confers many advantages, so it reduces the need to come to the ground where there is greater susceptibility to predators and environmental elements. Scent trails can be broken, so this is also, in a way, avoiding predators. The patagium can also function as insulation, as it's often wrapped around the body. It's very less energetically costly than other forms of locomotion. We find that many of our gliding species are folivores that have a very low energy diet. So a combination of this means that they are able to exploit those arboreal habitats and also access patchily distributed food sources. So moving on to diggers, where there are two digging marsupials in Australia, which are the marsupial moles. So very little is known about the ecology of these very enigmatic and highly specialised marsupials that live underground. So they diverged from other marsupials approximately 64 million years ago, and they form a separate and very ancient marsupial order with two living species, the northern and southern marsupial moles. They are the most rarely found mammal species in Australia. So they have a very small population, they have a very remote range, and they have this unusual subterranean habit. So they're obviously very hard to find. They have some subterranean specializations. So their eyes are reduced to vestigial subcutaneous lenses. They have no external ears. They have a horny shield on the snout, and they have well-developed forelimbs with spade-like claws. Excuse me. The forelimb analysis of fossils has indicated that early moles or pre-moles were also specialised for digging, but this adaptation was more likely for burrowing through leaf litter on the rainforest floor. So this burrowing then became sort of like a pre-adaptation for burrowing through other kinds of substrates, including sand. And a comparable range of habitats spanning swamps to deserts actually characterises African golden moles, which are obviously eutherian mammals, which have similar burrowing adaptations. So collectively, this shows that arid substrates are obviously not required for moles to evolve into moles and have those and to achieve a subterranean existence and evolve those traits that facilitates that existence. So I have some footage of a marsupial mole. It's not great footage, but it's pretty much the only video that I could find. And unfortunately, the view doesn't allow a very good indication of how they're using those front forelimbs and claws to burrow down. But essentially, the claws are involved with first initially breaking that harder crust of the sandy substrate, and then they really start going at it and kicking out the softer sand once they've broken through. So they actually burrow down and they'll actually then tunnel through the sand underneath the surface. But we don't know much about these species just because of their subterranean existence. And that's it. So I'm going to leave it there for Australian species. We haven't covered swimmers, but there's actually no swimming Australian marsupials. However, there is a South American species called the yapok. So I have this video that I will play for you, which is a bit of a fast fact and has lots of information, interesting and curious information about this species in South America.
In the forested streams of South America lives a curious little mammal called the yapok. Also known as the water opossum, it's the only marsupial adapted for an aquatic lifestyle. And to be so at home in the water, it's developed a curious trait. The males have pouches too. And what's a male yapok do with his pouch? Tuck his junk, of course. Yapoks are nocturnal, spending their nights diving in streams in search of small fish, crustaceans, insects, and frogs. They're sort of like an otter or muskrat, but cousin to the good old Virginia opossum. And they have a lot of similar aquatic adaptations: webbed feet, water-repellent fur, and tails that they use as rudders. But one of their water-adapted traits stands out. They're the only living marsupial species in which both sexes have pouches. The females use their pouch, like other marsupial ladies do, as a nice protective case for their developing young. But because they enjoy such a wet lifestyle, a female yapok's pouch is watertight. That way it keeps the babies safe and dry while mom's swimming. The male's pouch isn't watertight, but it's definitely there, which is more than you can say for any other adult male possum or any other adult male marsupial for that matter. Some young male marsupials have pouches, but they lose them by the time they mature, except for yapoks. And like a female's pouch, the male yapok's pouch keeps something safe and warm while the animal swims. his scrotum. And that's probably in part to help keep his sensitive sac safe, as dangly bits are thought to be a bit inconvenient when swimming because they create drag and they could snag on an unseen object. Yow. Perhaps more importantly, a nice pouch ensures that the sperm makers stay at just the right temperature. One of the reasons mammals have an external sac for the testes is actually to keep them cool. Overheating damages sperm, so hot testicles can hamper a male's fertility. But it's not good for sperm to get too cold either, and getting wet is a sure way to catch a chill. That's because water acts as a better heat conductor than air, so you lose heat more quickly in it. Hence the yapok's unique system. Other water-dwelling mammals face the same issue, but since they lack pouches, they've come up with other ways to hit that Goldilocks temperature. In whales, dolphins, manatees, and seals, the testicles are internal, but they're hooked up to a kind of cooling system that uses chilled blood from the extremities to prevent overheating. Sea lions do have scrotums, but they can be a bit flexible about the degree of dangling. They're able to tuck their testicles up and in and only poke them out into their scrotums as needed to cool off or during the breeding season. And otters are considered seasonally scrotal. Their testes are so small when they're not breeding that they don't really protrude from the body, so they don't create much drag or catch on things. But since yapoks come from an evolutionary lineage where pouches are a thing, natural selection apparently co-opted a part already at hand to help males with their tender testes when they took to the water. Because if you've got a pocket right there, you might as well use it.
Okay. So on that note, I'm going to leave today's lecture there. And here is some reading material for your further learning. Thanks for tuning in.